Hello, fellow playmates. I am fascinated by this book that my friend Rob Gauthier, channel of Aridif and Treb, did in 2012. It's called Extraterrestrial Life, Galactic Humans. And he's interviewing pretty much like 12 human-like beings throughout the galaxy. And actually, he's channeling Treb, and Jefferson VIscardi is the one that's actually doing the interview. So I just wanted to read it with you guys and see how fascinating it is to you guys. So I hope you all are having a blessed day or night, whichever you are in, and we shall begin. Extraterrestrial Life, Galactic Humans, 2012. I'm not trying to be professional or anything like that, so I'm just going with the flow. There are a few grammar, typos, so, but we'll get through it. It's so fascinating that I just had to share it with you guys. And I'll definitely leave a link in the description down below if you are interested in checking it out yourself. So, the different categories of inhabited worlds. As a result of spirit teaching, we know that the conditions of the various worlds differ one from the other, with respect to the degree of elevation or inferiority of their inhabitants, amongst whom are those inferior to the inhabitants of Earth, both physically and merely, some in the same category, yet others which are more or less superior in every aspect. In the inferior worlds, existence all material passions are sovereign, and morality is almost nil. At the same time as the soul is progressing, the material influences diminish, to such an extent that the elevated world's life is, by way of saying, all spiritual. In the intermediate worlds, good is mixed with evil, one or the other predominating according to the degree of advancement of the majority of the inhabitants. Although it is not possible to make an absolute classification of the different worlds, we can at least divide them in general terms by virtue of the state in which they are in, and the destiny they bring with them, based on the most predominant features upon each planet in the following manner. Primitive worlds destined to receive the initial incarnations of the human soul, worlds of test and atonements, where evil predominates, regenerating worlds where souls who still have to atone may absorb new strength by resting from the fatigue of fighting, blessed worlds where goodness outweighs evil, celestial or divine worlds inhabited by purified spirits where only good exists. Earth belongs to the category of the worlds of test and atonements, which is why mankind lives encompassed by such misery. Spirits who find themselves incarnated in any world are not bound to that same world indefinitely, nor do they go through all the phases of progress needed to achieve perfection in that one world. When they reach the maximum degree of advancement their world has to offer, they then pass on to a more elevated one, and so on, successfully till they reach the state of purified spirit. These different worlds are stations where the spirits find the elements they need for their progress that are in accordance to their degree of perfection. It is recompense to ascend to a world of higher elevation, just as it is a punishment to prolong their stay in miserable worlds, or to be regulated to another even more unhappy one than the one they were in, due to persisting badness. In qualifying inferior and superior worlds, there is nothing absolute. A world is relatively inferior or superior only in relation to those or other worlds which may above or below it on the scale of progression. In taking the Earth as a comparison, we may get an idea of what an inferior world is like by supposing us inhabitants to be similar to the primitive races or members of the barbaric nations, examples of which are still to be found amongst us today, these being the remnants of the primitive state of this planet. In the most backward worlds, the inhabitants are, to a certain extent, rudimentary creatures, having human form but devoid of all beauty. Their instincts have not yet softened to any sentiment of delicacy or benevolence, nor have they acquired any notions of justice or injustice. Brute force is the only known law. Without either industry or inventions, they pass their time in conquest of food. However, God does not abandon even one of his creatures. At the bottom of the darkest intelligence lurks a seed, sometimes more, sometimes less developed, a vague intuition of a supreme being. This instinct is enough to make them superior one from the other, and to prepare their ascension to a more complete life, for they are not degraded beings, but children who are growing. In between the inferior and elevated levels are innumerable others, from the pure spirits, dematerialized and brilliant with glory. It is impossible to recognize the primitive beings they once were, just as the adult it is difficult to recognize the embryo. In other worlds which have reached a superior level, the moral and material scale is still very different from that which exists on Earth. As everywhere, the form is always human, but it is more beautiful, more perfected, and above all else, purified. The body possesses nothing of the earthly material and consequently is not subject to the same necessities, sicknesses, or deteriorations which the predominance of matter provokes. Due to the higher refinements, the senses are able to capture perceptions, which the gross matter of this world obstructs. The specific lightness of body permits rapid and easy locomotion. Instead of dragging painfully over the ground, the body floats, as it were, above the surface, or glides through the air with no effort apart from that of desire, just as the angels are depicted as doing, or the tall whites in Area 51. Above the surface or glides through the air with no effort apart from that of desire, just as the angels are depicted as doing, or as the manes in the fields. According to his wishes, man keeps the features of his past migrations and shows himself to his friends as they knew him, except for the fact that he now radiates divine light and is transfigured by interior impressions which are always of an elevated nature. In the place of continence, discolored and dejected by suffering and passions, life and intelligence sparkle with splendor, which painters have shown through the halo. Very advanced spirits suffer only slight resistance to matter, thus allowing body development to be extremely rapid, making infancy short and almost non-existent. With the absence of worry and anguish, life is proportionately longer than Earth. In principle, longevity is in proportion to the degree of advancement of each world. Death in no way conveys any horror of decomposition. Far from causing terror, it is considered a happy transformation because there is no doubt as to the future. During life, the soul, being no longer constricted by compact matter, expands itself and delights in a lucidity which places it in an almost constant state of emancipation and allows completely free thought transmission. In these blissful worlds, relationships between peoples and individuals are always friendly, never perturbed by ambition to enslave thy neighbor or make war. There are no masters, no slaves, non-privileged by birth, only moral and intellectual superiority, which establishes all conditions and which ultimately gives supremacy. Although authority receives and deserves the respect of everyone, as it is only given to those who merit it, and is therefore always exercised with justice. Oops. Man does not try to elevate himself above another, but only above himself by striving for perfection. His objective is to ascend to the category of pure spirit. Although this desire is never a torment, but rather a noble ambition, which induces him to study ardently in order to become an equal. In these worlds, all the delicate and elevated sentiments of human nature find themselves exalted and purified. Hate is unknown, as are petty jealousies and envy. The ties of love and brotherhood hind all humanity, each to others, so that the strong help the weak. Through a greater or lesser degree of intelligence, man acquires possessions of a smaller or larger quantity. However, nobody suffers from want, as no one needs to make atonement. In short, evil does not exist in these worlds. Evil is still needed in your world in order to make known goodness, night in order to be able to admire light, sickness as to be able to appreciate health. In those other worlds, there is no need of these contrasts. Eternal light, eternal beauty, and eternal serenity of the soul offer proportional eternal happiness, free from the perturbations caused by the anguish of material life and the contact with evil creatures who find no access to these realms. These are the things which cause the human spirit most difficulty in understanding. Mankind has been sufficiently ingenious as to paint the torments of hell, but could never imagine the glories of heaven. Why not? Because being inferior, only pain and misery have been known, and as yet the celestial brightness has never been seen. So one cannot speak of that which is unknown. Well, unless there are those of you that have experienced this love and light, right? Which some of us have. However, while humanity is raising itself up and cleansing its soul, horizons are expanding, and mankind begins to compare the goodness which is in front of him, as well as the badness which is behind him. Meanwhile, the happy worlds are not specifically privileged orbs, as God is not partial to any one of his children. To each one he gives the same rights and the same opportunities wherein to reach these worlds. He makes each one start at the same point and gives no one more than another. Even the highest categories are accessible to all. It only depends upon the individual to conquer their place by means of work, so reaching it more quickly or remaining inactive for centuries and centuries while remaining inactive for centuries and centuries. Among the many stars in the blue canopy of the sky, how many worlds there are like yours, destined by God to serve for atonement and probation. But although there are some that are more miserable, there are also others that are happier, like those of transition, which can be called worlds of regeneration. Each planetary vortex moving in space around a common center drags with its own primitive worlds of exile, probation, regeneration, and happiness. We have spoken to you of worlds where newly born spirits are placed, when they are still ignorant of both good and evil, but where they have the possibility of traveling towards God, being in possession of themselves through free will. We have also revealed to you the fact that ample faculties are given to each soul to enable it to practice good. But, Alice, there are those who succumb. So God, who does not desire their annihilation, permits that they go to these worlds where from one incarnation to another they are purified and regenerated, returning worthy of the glory of which they are destined. Regenerating worlds serve as transition phases between those of probation and happiness. The penitent souls find calm and rest on them and can continue the purifying process. Beyond doubt, man still finds himself subject to the laws that rule matter. Humanity still experiences your sensations and desires, but is liberated from the ungoverned passions to which you are slaves, freed from pride which silences the heart, envy which tortures, and hate which suffocates. On all sides the word love is written. Perfect equity resides over all social relationships.